What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Scouting the Fins right here on the 3 Hours Per Carry podcast network, also part of the 5 Reasons Sports Network. This week, the Miami Dolphins made a really big trade that has a big ripple effect throughout the NFL and the NFL draft. Jalen Waddle was traded to the Denver Broncos for a first-round pick, a third-round pick, and a fourth-round pick swap to the Denver Broncos. Obviously, today's episode, we're not going to be talking about the wide receiver group, but in the future, we will have a wide receiver draft episode coming through. Coach, quick thoughts on Jalen Waddle being traded?
Yeah, I think that it made sense for the team. Love Jalen Waddle as a player, as a person, but with where the Dolphins are right now and what the Broncos were offering there, that move made a lot of sense. And I do think there is some relevance to today's conversation as well, because that brings the Dolphins up to 11 draft picks in next month's draft. And obviously, when you have more draft picks, it provides you the opportunity to double down on a couple more positions. And interior offensive lineman could be a great place for the Dolphins to consider drafting a couple of them this year.
Yeah, we wish Jalen Waddle the best. Definitely going to miss him and his production the last 5 seasons. But today's episode, we're talking about interior offensive linemen, the guards, and the centers. And as always, we're talking about the thresholds, the data, the film, and then the analysis of it. So for Jon-Eric, Sullivan, and Jeff Hafley, going back to what the Green Bay Packers valued in their organizational philosophy, from where Sully comes from, you're looking at just over interior linemen that are above 6'3", above 6'4", over 313 pounds, have over 33-inch arms, run just a sub 5-second 40-yard dash. Their 10-yard split is under 1.8 seconds. The 3-cone is under 7.7 seconds. Just again, we're looking at some offensive guards and interior linemen in Bobby Slowik's scheme that are athletic, that are versatile, have big arms, and can run up to the second level.
Yeah, I think that when we're talking about linemen, both for Jon-Eric Sullivan and Bobby Slowik, it kind of feels almost opposite. So you got to find something in the middle there. Bobby Slowik is running, the wide zone, outside zone stuff. So you want some more athletic linemen in that scheme, but at the same time, Jon-Eric Sullivan stood up there in front of the fans and told you that when it gets cold, fast gets slow, but big doesn't get little, right? So you can't go out and say something like that and then go draft some smaller offensive linemen. So I think that what we're really going to be looking for are some guys that have that size to hold up when the temperatures drop, but are also athletic enough to get on the edge and get Devon Achane out there in space where we want to see him most.
Yeah, for sure. Well, as always, we have 3 archetypes for these players. But before we get into these archetypes, wanted to talk about a little bit about the combine, the athletic testing, and the numbers. And I think a guy who really shot up the boards was Kentucky interior lineman Jalen Farmer. He posted a sub 5-second 44.93 40, passes the threshold, 1.75 10-yard split, destroys the 1.79 10-yard split, 4.31 shuttle, destroys the 4.73 threshold as well. He had a phenomenal workout, Coach.
Yeah, absolutely. He definitely displayed his athleticism. I think that there's a little bit of a consistency issue with him, and I think that's why he's not talked about with some of these, high second round into the first round type guards. I felt this was, I would have liked to see him create a little more movement in the run game. Thought that at times he didn't do a great job of attaching at the second level when he got out into space with that athleticism. But I think he solid build. He moves very well, obviously. So I think there's a lot of upside with a player like Jalen Farmer. But this is one of those players that we talk about the film translating to the workouts. Right there's a little bit of a gap there for him, but there is certainly a high ceiling with Jalen Farmer.
Yeah, for sure. All right, another combine winner was Keelan Rutledge, Coach. I mean, he had the best short shuttle of any offensive lineman in that group.
Yeah, and I mean, he is one of my favorite interior offensive linemen in the draft. I think this is a player that, when you talk about the film and the testing matching up, this is exactly who you're talking about. I like his build. He's got that nice wide frame, which is, the ideal for the interior offensive lineman. We saw the more narrow builds in a Liam Eichenberg, Cole Strange type of player. This is completely opposite of that. Unlike Farmer, I thought that Rutledge does do a good job in the run game. I think he showed on film how well he can move in space for a guy um, that's his size. He also might have some positional versatility as well. At the Senior Bowl, he worked out some as a center, so you could have some. Obviously, not going to compete with Aaron Brewer, but if that is a position that the team likes him in, and they don't want to hand out that Tyler Linderbaum contract to Aaron Brewer, right? Maybe this is a guy that could be at least considered in that type of role. Right now, he is my second ranked interior offensive lineman, so I'm a big fan of Keelan Rutledge.
Hey, that's high numbers for Rutledge right there. All right, let's go ahead and get right into it. Once again, three archetypes, same as every episode. We've got the power anchor, which is the mauler who wins with first contact violence in tight space. The zone puller, the guy that can execute the lateral reach on outside zone, on wide zone, climbing to the second level on combo blocks. They have the speed, they have the agility to pull through the hole. This zone puller is a direct Bobby Slowik offensive fit. You're talking about guys like Try Turner, Chris Lindstrom, Wyatt Teller. The guys that we talked about power anchors is more so like a Zach Martin, Kevin Zietler type of build. And then you have the versatile interior coach, your guard and centers that are interchangeable, kind of like, Aaron Brewer when he was in Tennessee and now in Miami that can play, left guard, right guard, or a center. These versatile interior linemen can both pass block and run block, and their grades, data, and film should be above average. Think of guys like Ben Jones and John Feliciano. I hope I hope those player comps are much more along the line of what we'll be talking about, or these comps are what we can pull up for a lot of these guys in this draft class.
Yeah, those are some very very high quality names that you're putting out there. I think that it's not easy to find guys that can do everything, right? We've seen the Solomon Kinleys that can't move in space, right? And then you've got other guys like Cole Strange that might do okay in space, but didn't do great in close quarters. So I definitely looking forward to talking about some of these guys and finding out the ones that might be able to meet in the middle there, where they can do a little bit of both.
All right, let's get right into it, into the zone pullers. This is probably the number one offensive guard or interior lineman in the draft. And coach, I gotta say, both you and I, we're not the biggest fans of him being, the consensus number one offensive guard or someone who we should think be taken off the board at number 11. That's Penn State's Vega Ione. 6'4", 320 pounds, consensus number one interior lineman all across the board. He's got an 85 overall PFF grade, around 1.8K snaps at left guard, under 400 snaps at right guard. 0 sacks, 0 hits, only 4 hurries last season, and 0 sacks in his last 31 games. I see him more so as like a Cooper Beebe type of guard who was drafted in the 3rd round a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I am a big fan of Ioana. He, if we're talking about strictly interior offensive lineman, he is the top one on my board. If we start, talking about Maligoa, Fano,
Yeah.
those type of guys in that conversation as well, then Ioana's not my highest rated guy, but very extremely strong in pass protection, probably the best interior pass protector that you're going to find in this draft. One of the things that I found interesting looking up some notes on him was that he didn't start playing football until either his sophomore or junior year of high school, and he's a 4th year junior, so he's still somewhat young when it comes to experience as an offensive lineman. Um, you know, I think he's got. I don't. I don't know that I would draft any guard at 11, and that's just kind of a stance that I've always had, right? And if you do, then I feel like it's got to be a generational type guy. Your Quentin Nelsons, your Zach Martins, that type. And I don't see you want to up in that stratosphere. So it's a player that I really like, but when it comes to that conversation of, would I consider him at number 11? I don't know that I see him that high. And I guess the reason that I don't is I need to see a little more refinement in the run game. He's shown the athleticism to get there to do that, but it doesn't always show up on the film that way. But it's certainly a player. Again, like I said, didn't start playing football till high school, so there is still a ceiling there that can be tapped into. So very good player, just not somebody that I would be over the moon with at 11.
I think when you talk about just his quote unquote only fatal flaw is more so his speed up to the second level,
Mhm.
especially in the NFL when these linebackers are much more faster. They could beat him to the spot. Like those quick interior guys, linebackers could potentially beat him off the snap to just get that one step ahead. And in Bobby Slowik's scheme, you can't you can't allow the defender to get a step ahead. And we saw it last season with the guards the Miami Dolphins had, and the last two seasons where if they're not hitting that first step, Devon Achane is going to get hit within maybe 2 to 3 yards, and he's going to have to work extra to wiggle out of that. You don't want that happening to Devon Achane. Um, Something I saw was that sometimes his feet can go dead on contact. He's not generating that drive once he's there into that second level, and his pad level was a bit too high. So when you have, those twitchy three technique defensive linemen, those 6'2", 6'3" linebackers who are crossing him with that speed, it is going to give him fits. And as you said, if you're picking an interior offensive lineman at 11, he better be generational. Now, if the Dolphins were to trade back and him being available, then I think it's a totally different story where you could get what I think is a solid Pro Bowl guy who has a high floor, for sure. And you know what his ceiling will be too. Like this will be your decade-long starting guard for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's not me sitting here saying bad stuff about Iowa. I mean, there's the clip of him after a game jumping over the wall and helping the equipment guy. Like you're talking about a high character guy, a very good player, just in terms of positional value and where he is as a finished product. Just isn't for me at 11, but I like him a lot.
All right. Next guy on the list is Emmanuel Pregnon. He is being mocked in the 30s and 40s from PFF, PFN, and other mock draft simulators. 71 PFF run block grade, 93 in zone run blocking, 85.8 in pass blocking. One sack, two hits, two hurries in 2025, 0 sacks in 2023 to 2024. Fits that 6'4" height, fits that weight of 314 pound, passes the long arms. I mean, his is what, 33 and 5/8 inches, 5.2140, kind of fails that. His 10-yard split is a 1.82. But man, this guy does not have any inch of fat on him. This guy is pure muscle, coach. Pure muscle.
Oh yeah, very very well built player here. Played 2 years at Wyoming before 2 years at USC, and then finished up there at Oregon. Uh, Maybe it's just my value of the guards overall, but I have him a little bit lower than what the projections there that
Is it
you're
because of
talking.
his
But
age? Because he's 26, right? Is that why?
no, so I was actually a little surprised the numbers that you kind of put out there for the pass blocking, because the way that I see Pregnon is he is dominant in the run game. Like it is a lot of fun to watch him move guys in the run game. So to hear that grade in zone blocking is not surprising, because once he gets you moving, he's there is no stopping with it. But for me, I have concerns with him in pass protection. I think he has a very good anchor. Like he's not going to get walked back like we've seen the guards in Miami do. But kind of the same way that you were talking about Ioana there, when we start getting him moving laterally, then I feel like the tape drops off a little bit there. And again, right, if he was a stud in pass protection, we'd probably be talking about him up with Ioana in terms of top guard in this class. But yeah, I love what he does in the run game. If we were talking about, an offense that, don't want to bring him up at Tua, right? The quick throwing balls out quick, then it might be something I'm like, okay, I'll live with it for the upside in the run game, but depending on what your pass game looks like, that could be a reason that you knock Pregnon down a little bit on the board.
Yeah, you might not want to get pure pass progressions with Emmanuel Pregnon because his skill set specifically calls for a zone heavy scheme. He's not as dominant in pass protection. He doesn't have that same level of nastiness in the run game. And that's his, fatal flaw as well. We talked about Ione with his fatal flaw. This is Pregnon's fatal flaw. Like in pass protection, his wide base can leave him a little bit late and stranded against faster pass rushers as well. But I think just the way he moves in the run game is much, much better. So I have him as my number 2 as well. All right, the third guy in the zone puller is Chase Bisontis out of Texas A&M. Big guy, 6'5", 315 pounds. A lot of people are comping him to a Wyatt Teller type of, offensive guard. 1 sack, 3 hits, 8 hurries in 2025. Although he had 8 penalties, strictly only played left guard around 1.3K snaps at left guard, 1.76 10-yard split, 5.02 40. Everything fits the bill for Jon-Eric Sullivan and Bobby Slowik.
Yeah, another player that I like, and we talk about, my board, Ioana's number 1, but then Rutledge, Pregnon, and Bisontis are all kind of grouped together in that 2 through 4 slot for me. I think that he is close to Pregnon in terms of the run game, right? Especially with the zone blocking. I think that in the gap and the power in those close quarters, root him out of the trenches type thing, I think he struggles a little bit there. And I think that a lot of that has to do with, I feel like he plays with good technique off the ball, right? But if he doesn't get that initial win, then I think the technique kind of falls off and can get a little sloppy there. And that is something that, you can improve over time. Love the way that he plays. He's one of these guys that, is going to play through the whistle, going to, probably piss some defensive linemen off. Love to see that. You mentioned Wyatt Teller, right? I like that comp because, one of the notes is that I have him, I feel like he is a solid, not spectacular player that I could see him, playing a decade in the NFL, maybe never reaching that upper echelon of guards, but, is going to be around, going to be a solid starter for a long time in the NFL.
Yeah, you talk about his mean, nasty streak. He really epitomizes the Maroon Goons nickname, for sure. That's a real tough, nasty player. And I think there is, with how young he is and how, harsh of a freshman season he still has room to improve at his age. I mean, if he's able, to become the starting left guard and, Miami moves, he either has competition at left guard with him and Jonas Avenaya. That's competition right there. Whoever wins, becomes a left guard. Maybe you move the other guy. And the Dolphins did also sign an offensive lineman to play right guard. I'm kind of blanking on the name.
Jamari Sawyer.
And Jamari Sawyer as well, who is quote unquote projected to be the right guard, but we don't necessarily see him as the best fit in right guard in Miami for sure. I do think with Bisontis, just we talk about the comp of Wyatt Teller, but Teller had a better arm length or a longer arm length than him. When he kind of opens his hips up a little bit early, he oversets and he's lured to go into the backfield and creates that soft inside shoulder where, edge rushers are able to go right underneath and put pressure on the quarterback, up against those faster 3 techniques. That's going to be a problem. And he's not necessarily going to win with inside leverage with that issue.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think that as we look at guys that can play in this offense, like you said, I think that for me, Sawyer is more of a left guard. But Basantis is a player that I think can certainly play in this system.
All right, next guy, Red Mullet, 680 pounds back squat, 15 reps on of 345 on the bench press. Before he was 20 years old, coach, Joe Moore Award winner, went through the phenomenal Iowa offensive line program. Gennings Dunker. His position is a right tackle, but we don't see him as a right tackle. We talked about it, in the offensive tackle episode that we did include him in offensive tackles. We both think he's better suited to be the right guard if he's picked up by Miami.
Yeah, I mean, I have him on my board as a tackle just because that's where he played. But if we have him as a guard, which is where I think is going to be his better position, then I think that he's another guy that's in that same kind of second tier bucket. I was not as high as on him with his 2024 film as I was with his 2025 film. I'm not quite as high as what the media seems to be with the flowing red hair and all that stuff. But I do think that he is another very solid player. Another one that I think struggles a little bit in pass protection, which isn't completely uncommon coming out of Iowa. They run the ball really well there, and they develop guys in that sense. But I didn't feel like he created a ton of room at point of attack, but in terms of outside zone, shows the athleticism that showed up at the combine there. And I think that he does, similar to Basantis, does a good job of creating movement on the run. Like if you get him and a defensive lineman moving horizontally, and he's probably going to come out on top of that. So I think that it's a player that might be drafted. Well, so I had in my notes, I thought that he might get drafted higher than consensus because of, a scheme fit, but it seems like the news cycle is kind of caught up. And I think that the view of him right now is probably where it should be. I think it was a little lower before. Combine kind of shot him up probably higher than what it should have been. And seems like he's kind of settled right into where I think he belongs.
Yeah, it's more so about the film for Jon-Eric Sullivan when he's drafting these guys. And a little bit of an important context, if the Dolphins were to draft him and move him to offensive guard, he's not a tackle converting to an offensive guard cold. He has the base. Iowa's coaching staff has drilled his zone reach at guard in practice, even during his tackle years, for sure. 4.63 shuttle is the single most important number from this combine for Miami's data evaluation for Gennings Dunker. That kind of says that his feet can work in tight space at a level that could exceed every other guard we're actually talking about in this podcast and potentially on Miami's board. I do think that, he could become one of those Rodgers, like if everything works out well for Dunker and if he's picked by Miami, the best case scenario for him would be to become a guy like Roger Saffold, a tackle who moved to guard and became a solid starter. Not necessarily, a lot of Pro Bowls, but, give him 7-8 years in Miami and you have, your starting guard for sure.
Yeah, agree. That's kind of the same way that I see him. Probably not Pro Bowl level, but probably a guy that, 7 to 10 years giving you solid play along the offensive line.
Yeah. All right. Next guy to round up this zone puller archetype is going to be Jalen Farmer. 6'4", 312 pounds, right guard only, around 1,637 right guard snaps last season. Gave up 3 sacks, but his true pressure rate is almost 7%, which is above the NFL average. However, he was the top offensive lineman in the Senior Bowl, and his pro day numbers shot him up on the board for sure, especially his shuttle number, which was the best of any guard. He's got 34 and a quarter inch arms. He clears the weight at 315 pounds, and he fits all of the check boxes for Jon-Eric Sullivan and Bobby Slowik.
I think he drops all of them except for the film part of it. It's not that his film is bad. I just don't think that his film is quite as high as the testing, and maybe his performances at the Senior Bowl kind of you know makes Jon-Eric Sullivan and Jeff Hafley feel like there's more to get there. But I felt like he was a player that was solid in pass pro, but I didn't think that he created enough movement in the run game for me. And that could be, we're talking about bringing in a Malik Willis. You want to do stuff to protect him. We've talked about some guys that are better run blocking than pass blocking earlier. And for me, Farmer's kind of the opposite. He's further along as a pass protector than a run blocker. So maybe that is what you want to surround Malik Willis with, somebody like that. And it's not that it's stuff that he can't do. It's just that, like, one of the notes that I have is feels like he gets his eyes down and leaning a little too much. But you can see he's got that good build. He moves well, like that. That all shows up on tape. I think that the stuff that the negatives that I have for Jalen Farmer are all stuff that's fixable, right? So if you're looking for a guard that's a little stronger in pass pro and you just want to continue to refine his techniques in the run game, and I think, I don't know, where consensus is for him, but he's more of a late day 2 guy for me, maybe into the top of day 3. And if you could get a player like this at that point that has the upside that he has, then I think that's really good value for him.
Yeah. You can teach technique, but you can't teach the size, strength, and speed that Jalen Farmer's with. And, he completely eliminated most of his major penalties in 2025 compared to his 2024 tape. That's a 1-year improvement trajectory. And the question will be is, if he's picked in Miami, can Bobby Slowik's offensive line coaching staff get Jalen Farmer, improving from year 1 to year 2 and into year 3? All right, that is it for the zone pullers. I think our overall number 1 consensus guy was Ione for the zone pullers as well, and we just kind of went down the rank from there. All right, we are gonna head to break and some information from our sponsor, Underdog. The tournament is back and the upsets are inevitable, and Underdog is the best place to get in on all the action. Playing on Underdog is easy. Just pick whether your favorite players will go higher or lower on stats like points, rebounds, steals, and more. Get your picks right and you could win up to 5,000 times your cash. This week on Underdog, I'm actually not looking at the March Madness. I'm actually looking at the Lakers Heat game Thursday night. I'm actually going lower on Kel'el Ware on 9.5 rebounds. He's had some issues rebounding the ball as of late. In the last 5 games, he pulled down double-digit rebounds on just 2 occasions. And he's playing up against the Lakers and DeAndre Ayton, who's been incredibly efficient lately. So that's someone who I'm looking for on Underdog Fantasy. Download the app today and use promo code 3yards to score $50 in bonus entries when you play your first $5. That's promo code 3yards. Underdog, make picks, win money.
18 plus, 19 plus in Alabama and Nebraska, 19 plus in Colorado for some games, 21 plus in Arizona, Massachusetts, and Virginia, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. See assets.underdogfantasy.com/web/play and get terms _DFS_.html for details. Offer not valid in Maryland, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit ncpgambling.org. In New York, call the 24/7 HOPE line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369.
All right, and we're back. Next archetype coach is going to be the power anchors. We have a couple of guys on these lists, and then some of these guys which we can find on day 3, early day 3, late day 3. A lot of the zone puller guys who we talked about are, day 1, day 2 guys, maybe very, very early day 3, depending on these teams. All right, first guy is actually going to be, one of the guys you talked about a lot earlier was Keelan Rutledge out of Georgia Tech. fits the bill for Jon-Eric Sullivan and Bobby Slowik. 6'4", 316 pounds. He's played only 43 snaps at left guard, almost 3,000 snaps at right guard, 48 total games, has a pass block of 75, a run block of 75, 99.3 pass block win rate as well. Came from Middle Tennessee, transferred over to Georgia Tech. Passes the shuttle time, fills the 40-yard time, and also is just over the 10-yard split at a 1.81. He's actually got one of the best origin stories in this draft class too, Coach.
I am not familiar with his origin story.
Really? So 3 sports stand out in high school in Tennessee. State champion in shot put, 1,000 point, 1,000 rebound basketball player.
Oh, wow.
3-star recruit who got 0 Power 5 offers and signed with Middle Tennessee State. Transferred to Georgia Tech after a coaching change, and that transfer almost ended before it started when he got into a car accident in December of 2023 that left him with a severe foot injury that cost him all of spring practice. Started all 13 games at right guard in 2024. First team All ACC, first team All American honors.
That's impressive. That was a lot of information about him that I didn't know. I mean, I talked about him a little bit earlier. I told you he's my number 2 interior offensive line without the tackles in there as well. You talked about his athletic testing being right on the edge there, and that's that does show up on film with him. That we talk about his fit into a wide zone scheme. That's a player that I think is kind of on that cutoff, right? You don't have to be an Aaron Brewer type athlete, but you do need to be a plus athlete. And I think Rutledge is good enough as an athlete to play in this scheme, but probably on the lower end of that good enough scale. And it just depends on how this new staff sees that for me.
I think he's got that scheme versatility, especially at Georgia Tech, where they had a whole bunch of different types of running games. He's more so better fit for a gap scheme that offers, those pulling guards, play action concepts, which is his best fit. And Bobby Slowik is going to have that, and they incorporated a little bit of that in last year's offense with Slowik and McDaniel, but now it's Bobby Slowik's. And I think that's actually going to help Keelan Rutledge and also help Malik Willis, because that's also something Matt LaFleur incorporated with Malik Willis last year. And look, his combine number suggests he can handle the zone concepts too. And that's the key phrase. He can handle it. He's not the zone puller archetype. He's got that power anchor. He is powerful. He's got just enough athleticism to execute those concepts at a functional level. But the thing is, sometimes on his landmarks, he can get a bit too high. He lunges at his opponents, and he doesn't really engage with that stable base into the second level. Now, once again, we talked about you can teach the technique, but you can't teach physical tools. He's got the physical tools, and he's not going to be like a Liam Eichenberg type of player,
no,
for sure. But he's got all the tools. He's got the physicalities. He can get coached up. He started at Middle Tennessee State, also started at Georgia Tech, and with the scheme versatility in Georgia Tech, if you're looking for a scheme versatile guy at that right guard position besides Austin Jackson and Aaron Brewer, I think that's a good fit for Miami if they do draft Keelan Rutledge in the second or third round.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add that. I agree completely. Talking about trying to add competition to that interior offensive line group, I think that Rutledge would be a great option as a day 2 player to put into that room.
All right, next guy is Micah Morris out of Georgia, 6'5", 334 pounds. That's a big dude. But that big of a dude might not be that good of a mover. I think he's got the highest or the best strength of any interior lineman in this class. He's been facing NFL caliber defensive linemen at Georgia every week in the SEC. That 5.0940 passes Sullivan's threshold, and the weight completely bypasses the interior lineman threshold. But he's big. He can start in the NFL. He's got good size, strength, quickness, but can he get up to the second level? Is he a system fit in Miami, coach?
That it's a great question because I know that after the combine, he came in at a 9.98 RAS, which was number 5 of all guards since 1987. But a lot of that was that his size and his jumps were really good. His running was not great, and he didn't even test in the agility part of it. So I think that had he done that, I think we'd have probably seen that RAS come down a little bit. And he's an interesting story because of the lack of experience he has at the college level. But when you look at why, right, last year he was stuck behind Dylan Fairchild and Tate Rutledge at Georgia. So it's not like he was, you know, stuck behind players that weren't NFL caliber. And you kind of see that when he's playing, right? He still looks like a player that's trying to figure out his body, has a very strong anchor. And I think that he does move okay, but when we're talking about Keelan Rutledge maybe being just above that threshold of what you want in a zone scheme, Micah Morris might be kind of on the opposite side of that line. Not a bad athlete, but maybe not good enough depending on what they want to do. But we've said it with a few guys, right? The talent is there. He's got the size, he's got the strength, he's got okay movement skills. More of a day 3 guy here, but this is another one that I like the upside of him. And like you said, like he's going to come in and he's probably going to start somewhere in the NFL, probably maybe not his rookie year, but probably within a few years. Like this is one of those guys that grown man body, grown man strength, that kind of stuff translates well into the NFL. And, like we said earlier, Jon-Eric Sullivan talked about, big doesn't get small and it doesn't get much bigger than Micah Morris.
Yeah, I just don't think he's the right system fit for Miami. And if he's available in day 3, that's more so of a developmental guy. You probably make him lose, 10 to 15 pounds. So that way he develops that first step quickness, coach him, drill him into that as well. And then you could potentially have him as a starter in 2 to potentially maybe 3 years. All right. After that, you more so have depth guys, in that power anchor archetype. Jeremiah Wright, Jaden Roberts, and Armaj Reed Adams. Jeremiah Wright out of Auburn, 6'5", 331 pounds, 1,716 snaps at right guard, 5 snaps allowed in 2025, more than in his first 3 seasons combined. I think he's more so of a developmental guy in that 5th, 6th round range.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, a lot of the stuff that I said about Micah Morris, I would apply to Jeremiah Wright in terms of, the large body, not a great mover. One of the things that, kind of turned me off with Jeremiah Wright, and it's it's a nitpicky thing when we're talking about an oversized guard, but, was not a great mover in space. And if he didn't locate that target initially, like his effort really dropped off. And that's, like I said, that kind of turned me off. I do think that he shows the ability to, in gap and power schemes, really be able to move guys, but it doesn't show up consistently. He's got the ability to displace defensive tackles at the line of scrimmage. Another player that's strong in pass pro, doesn't give ground. And I have him a little bit above Morris because I think that Jeremiah Wright is a more refined prospect than what Micah Morris is now. But when I think it's one of those guys that's going to need a fire lit under his butt, right? So if you talk about an opportunity where you bring in like a Keelan Rutledge or a Emmanuel Pregnon in day 2, and then you circle back around, you get a Jeremiah Wright and put him in a situation where he's got to compete to get on the field, then you could end up with a really good player. But right now, this is not the type of player that I would not look to draft him and put him directly into a starting lineup. I feel like that wouldn't have great results.
All right, next guy, Jaden Roberts out of Alabama, 6'5", 333 pounds. Once again, all at right guard. A lot of the guys who we've talked about are primarily right guard, and Miami needs someone to be at that right guard position. I think his best trait is the run blocking on downhill gap concepts. I don't think Miami's going to have a lot of gap concepts, more so sprinkled in here and there. He's got the Alabama pedigree, but nothing too major, nothing that stands out that is, day one or day two worthy. The last guy is Armaj Reed Adams out of Texas A&M. Big guy, 6'6", 314 pounds. He was Chase Bisontis' running mate. But a lot of the people, use the term to evaluate him as, he's clunky.
Yeah, and I think I see him the same way. I think that, he shows on tape that he's a very smart player, right? He's got high football intelligence. Feel like when you get him into short distances, right? If you're pulling across the line to kick somebody out, then he's really good at that. And I forget who we talked about earlier, but I talked about the initial contacting technique are really good, but then it kind of falls off. And I think that's where the clunky description comes in, that as the play develops and you see that kind of deteriorate. And so I like him, but this is another player that, right, this is more of a day 3 type grade for me. And if I'm comparing the upside of Bisontis to Adams Reed, right, then I'm going Bisontis all day. And I have questions as to whether or not Adams Reed can translate into the offense. So not a whole lot more to say on him.
All right. Next archetype is going to be the versatile interior that can play different guard spots and center spots. First guy on the list is, again, from Iowa, Bo Stevens, 6'6", 315 pounds. Primarily played left guard at Iowa. 88.3 PFF grade, best in the class. 92.9 pass blocking, led all Power 4 guards. 85.6 in run blocking. Through and through outside zone system guy for sure. Led all of the guards in PFF grades in both phases. Comeback player of the year in 2024. Missed all of 2023 due to injury. I think he might have missed a game or two in 2024 and another game in 2025. So the injury concerns are there for Bo Stevens, and which is why he's rated a little bit low in this podcast for us, because Jon-Eric, Sullivan, and Jeff Hafley, their philosophy is to have guys that have played at least 2 seasons consecutively without any injury risk. And there's only some exceptions if you are highly, highly talented, and if you just had a bizarre like ACL or Achilles injury that just happened while you were playing and it was just like a weird one. It's not the case for Bo Stevens right now.
Yeah, and I think that when we talk about Bo Stevens, he's kind of the opposite conversation of what we had with some of the guys earlier. We've talked about the guys that are good on initial contact and then they deteriorate after that. And Stevens is kind of the opposite, right? He lacks that pop on contact, but he does a good job straining through the play. Definitely not going to have the effort questions that we brought up with some of the other guys. I think that he plays a little bit out of control. And I think in a way, I think that comes down to a lack of natural strength at times. Not an alarming rate. Like, this is still a player that I have my notes, feels like the type of guy that's going to start for somebody in the NFL, but you're always going to be looking to replace him. So I think that just comes down to and especially in a zone blocking scheme, that you've got to be able to displace both horizontally and vertically, and you have to be able to play through that. So if he doesn't get latched on and then good position, be able to strain through that, I think you could run into some issues with Bo Stevens. But he's kind of more of a, when we look at some of these guys that are high ceiling type guys, right? This is more of your high floor type guy that I think that you kind of know what you're getting, but you're always going to want more with him.
Yeah, I think that just comes in his frame, his 6'6" frame. He lacks the technique to bend his waist in pass protection. It leaves him vulnerable to overextend, losing up against those swim and rip moves. His pad level is a bit too high. His 40 is a 5.35, misses the threshold by a lot. But I mean, that pass blocking grade is nice for sure, but are you evaluating him just on the pass blocking grade or the film as well, which you pretty much described? I think he's more of a day 3 guy, that fifth, sixth round guy that you can get for sure. And unless they sign off on his injury concerns, this could be a solid depth piece for the foreseeable future. All right, next couple of guys are going to be centers, Pat Coogan and James Brockermeyer, more so as insurance for Aaron Brewer. First guy on the list, Pat Coogan.
Yeah, and Coogan, I think, is a guy that has played multiple positions throughout his career. Played on a national championship team in Indiana. I think that he's got adequate lateral mobility, but can also get knocked back both in the run game and the pass game. So if
He
you're
was
looking for
also
that guy,
the Rose Bowl MVP too. One of the very first offensive linemen to win that award since 1944.
Love when the offensive linemen get that kind of recognition. It doesn't happen too often, as you just kind of pointed out there. I think very good college player. I think that he's going to struggle to be more than a reserve at the NFL level. But when we talk about the value of versatile reserve offensive linemen in the NFL, like almost every team is playing 7 or 8 offensive linemen throughout the year. And those guys that can play multiple positions and can handle it both physically and mentally are very valuable. So for me, Coogan is kind of that 6 offensive lineman that can play in multiple roles, can come off the bench without, you're going to have drop off from the starter, but it's not going to be because of not knowing what he's doing, because he's played all over the line before. I just don't see him as a long-term plus starter. I think it's going to be more of a spot starter, versatile backup for Pat Coogan.
All right, next guy on the list is the hometown guy, James Brockermeyer, the son of former first-round offensive tackle Blake Brockermeyer. 3 programs for James: Alabama, TCU, Miami. Started the national championship game at center for the Hurricanes. 6'3", just under 300 pounds. 5-second 40. And the only thing where he passes Jon-Eric Sullivan's threshold for a guard and, well, interior offensive lineman overall. On the lighter side, same thing with Pat Coogan, also on the lighter side, but his zone blocking tape is probably the best thing on his film, from the regular season to the playoffs to also in the national championship game.
That's interesting. Maybe I need to watch a little more of him, because I only have a couple of games that I've watched of him, but I felt like he was more of a positional blocker than a mover. So I didn't really see him as a great option to translate into the zone blocking scheme. Notes that I have on him that I feel like he gets knocked back in pass pro, but does a solid job of resetting the anchor, and you don't always see that, right? Some guys, you have guys that just don't give up any ground, and then you have some guys that can't anchor at all, right? But so he's kind of a guy that doesn't have that initial anchor, but has pretty good recovery, right? And if you can do that with a quarterback like Malik Willis, then he can make something out of that. But other than that, a lot of the same notes that I had on Pat Coogan in terms of position versatility, high football intelligence. Another player that I think could be a versatile interior backup for a lot of years in the NFL. But if he makes in that starting lineup, probably a guy that you're looking to replace year over year.
Yeah. All right. We talked a lot of interior offensive linemen, and I think it's important for the Dolphins to grab a guy or two in this draft, especially with 11 picks in the 2026 NFL draft. But I think the most important decision for the Dolphins along the interior offensive lineman group is extending Aaron Brewer, second team All-Pro. He's a communicator of this offensive line and the offense. He's a free agent after 2026. I think this is probably the most important decision the Dolphins are going to make this offseason, and I think they should extend him before the draft comes into play.
And see, I kind of have the opposite feeling there. And I love Aaron Brewer. You've seen the stuff that I've posted on him all year. But Aaron Brewer is not a completely scheme versatile player. There are things that he struggles with. And in Mike McDaniel's offense, they stayed away from a lot of that. Not necessarily because of Aaron Brewer, but Mike McDaniel also did a really good job of emphasizing things that Aaron Brewer does well. You heard him talking about how it opens up doors in the playbook that don't exist with other centers. So if I am Jon-Eric Sullivan, Jeff Hafley, Bobby Slowik, I kind of want to see Aaron Brewer playing in this system. I want to see him replicate it with Bobby Slowik calling the plays. I don't think his contract is getting any bigger than what it is right now with the Tyler Linderbaum contract, right? Aaron Brewer is going to be looking for similar money to that. So for me, I would wait until we get into the season, make him, prove once again that he is that caliber of player. And if he does, then I have no problem opening up the checkbook for it. But I also don't want, we just went through a scenario where we opened up the checkbook for players that, didn't necessarily prove they could do it on a year-over-year basis. So just given the change in the offense, I would like to see Aaron Brewer do it, for a few games at least through this season and show that he can replicate it in this offense before giving him probably a, top of the market contract for NFL centers.
I don't think a lot of people have actually brought that point up with Aaron Brewer. Haven't heard a lot of people talking about it, and I never really thought about it either. But I think the consensus is that they should lock him up before he gets expensive. And I think you talked about the other side of it. What if his play degrades under Bobby Slowik? What if Slowik is more so thinking about like, okay, this is what the draft plan is. This is what the draft looks like. You know, they're not necessarily he's not necessarily making the playbook right now. You have your zone concept staples. You have your gap concept stapled. But what if Miami decides to be more so of a gap pulling team compared to has more gap pulling plays than zone blocking plays? Just so that way Malik Willis feels comfortable. So that way Patrick Paul feels comfortable. So that way Devon Achane can have a more versatile skill set in the running game. And then that may end up, costing Aaron Brewer some money. That may, lead his play instead of second team all pro. Maybe he just becomes just a pro bowler instead of an all pro.
Yep.
Those are all good discussions to have. Outside of that, this was the Interior Offensive Line episode on Scouting the Fins. Make sure you stick with us. Also part of the 3 Yards Per Carry Podcast Network. Also part of the 5 Reason Sports Network. As always, y'all, go Fins.